So what would you all say are the biggest current concerns for migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers here in the U.S., and particularly in Central and South Texas, since this is where we find ourselves? So whoever would like to respond could do so.
Is this what you? Okay. As a journalist who has covered immigration a lot and who in my column can write about it anytime I want, I guess the issues that come to mind are the threats of deportation by all of the Republican candidates. It's certainly on the minds of people who listen to this and are nervous about it. Also the hate speech. I can't tell you how many stories we've done or blog posts I have written over the last 2 years about the just intensity of the hate speech and the threats to ordinary people trying to, whose biggest sin, whose biggest crime is wanting to work. Lately, as a journalist, I've also had the occasion to write about other kinds of immigrants beyond Central America, and the Syrian refugees, which you had mentioned. The Catholic Charities is awaiting for their arrival in San Antonio at some point, so I know we'll be writing about that. I think the courts, the appellate court's decision on the Obama administration's hopes to keep millions of people in the United States legally is going to be a continual story that will follow, and I've been reading a lot about what people think the Supreme Court might do when that appeal is made, so we'll be watching that. I guess the biggest thing lately are the inflammatory rhetoric coming from the Republican Party regarding immigrants, regarding the border, regarding hate speech.
Thank you, Elaine.
From my perspective, thank you so much to OLU for having us here, for having this important conversation today, and for being here today. From my perspective as a practicing immigration lawyer and someone involved in advocacy here in Central Texas for refugees and immigrants, I learned from those with whom I work that a major concern that many have, be they immigrants, be they refugees, is a concern that this nation appears to be forgetting, maybe even abandoning, some of the most basic principles that we have held so dear for so long. We throw away the term that this is a nation of immigrants very, very loosely now. But what we have seen over the past many years has been a deterioration of the immigration system and the making much, much more difficult at every turn the lives of refugees and immigrants here in the United States. We have seen and we have been blitzed by images of Republicans in the House of Representatives, of political candidates, making bombastic statements about refugees and immigrants, round them up and send them home. What I don't think that we've spent enough time considering as a nation and as a citizenry is the fact that we haven't heard very much positive from the other side either. I think it is important for us to remember that in the course of this current administration, one for which I admit I voted 2 times, we have seen more deportations than ever in our nation's history. More than 400,000 deportations every year. At the end of this administration, that will be more than 3.2 million deported people. We've also seen, just in the recent past, the return of family detention. And I know that this is something that is of great concern to not just this city, but people in this room, because I know many of the faces, I recognize and I see them nodding. This has been a concern of ours in this community for more than a year. And this is, I think as a Texan, we get used to people talking about our governors or rogue officers along the border or police officers. But I think it's important for us to know and to remember, and I would like to hear some response, that family detention was a policy that was cooked up by the White House. This did not come from the Department of Homeland Security. This did not come from the state of Texas. This came from our president. And it was a policy of deterrence of refugees. The idea that if we could detain and make life hard, impossible, for a small group of what many would consider vulnerable people, women and children, women and minor children. But we will call these people through affidavits and declarations that we will have our senior members of the Department of Homeland Security sign, calling them threats to our national security. Women and children seeking our help are threats to our nation's security. And so we must deter them from seeking refuge here. And the deterrent strategy was one of detention. And we have now created 3,800 beds of detention, the largest detention centers in this country. And if you know they're the biggest in this country, they're probably the biggest on earth, just for women and children. So I take heart at the focus on family that we've seen today. I have worked with families more over the past year than ever in my life. I'm a single man. But I have seen the love of a mother for her daughter. I have seen that love. But I've also seen family structure very, very much harmed by this policy. I could just cite one example in terms of individual stories. In the last 3 weeks, my organization, as well as providing legal services, runs a shelter for women and children who have been released from these for-profit, corporate-run, private prisons. And ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, will bring them to us, to our house, sometimes 1 or 2, sometimes 50 or 100, depending on the day. And we pick them up at the local Mennonite church. I picked up 2 families last week, a mother and a son and a mother and a daughter. The mother and the son got in the back seat of my Honda, and the mother of the daughter, a 9-year-old, put her daughter in the back seat. And how many times, moms, have you done this? You put your kid in the back seat, you walk to the passenger side, and you get in. How long does that take? In the time that the mother closed the door on her daughter and got into the passenger seat, her daughter had a full-blown meltdown. An absolute traumatic meltdown. All she could scream for the next 10 or 15 minutes was, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy." It silenced us all in the car. And for a while I was a little angered that this detention system had made this child so traumatized that she was crying. And I had a secondary realization that I think really gets to why these policies affect us. I'm an immigrant. I became a citizen in 2004, but I'm a citizen. These policies affect us because that girl was afraid of me, is what I realized. That young girl was terrified that I was going to do something bad with her because based on this, she saw the America. Not the America that she was seeking, not the America that promised her protection, but the America that she found. And it is an Obama policy. It is a White House policy. Deterrence has been held to be not a lawful use of detention, yet we continue to see family detention imposed. If the motivation, if the only reason for family detention, deterrence, is gone, why do we still have family detention?
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you for your question, and I know you all are doing incredible work here in South Texas to help families, so I appreciate that work, and I know there are a lot of people that appreciate that work. So this is not a White House policy, and I can't speak to who you're talking to, but I can tell you that this is something that it is an administration policy, and we will not always agree on all policies out there. I understand that. It is not a deterrent policy. There is a need to safely bring people to the country, process them, and then let people who have access to a humanitarian form of relief, which I know you folks and many others in the room are helping people with, get access to that relief. I know that there have been a lot of concerns with the program, and I'm actually going to visit Billy tomorrow, and many people have visited Billy from DC in an effort to understand what's working, what's not, and how to make the things that are not working work better. I understand that we're not going to agree on whether there should be family detention or not, but if there is family detention, we want to make it as humane as possible, and that's what we're trying to do. There are a number of policies that the Secretary put forward over the last several months to make the system work better, including making sure that people who claim reasonable or critical fear are able to be released as quickly as possible. And as I understand it, but I will learn more when I go down there tomorrow, those interview times and people being processed is moving a lot faster than it was. And I know that there were challenges and problems with the system when it first started. And so we are working to fix the system. We may be in a place where the system goes away, sometime soon. I can't say when. It's something that people in Washington, and not just me, and not just the president, but many in the federal government are seriously taking a look at, because people have raised concerns, and we understand those concerns, and we want to find a way to find a more humane way to do this. And I understand and acknowledge your concern.
Thank you, Felicia. Aimee?
Well, I think that we've heard some really important issues come up with these three comments here. And they're all related. And as an anthropologist and also a scholar of Mexican American studies and history, we know that the immigration issue is a very long history, right? Especially concerning Mexicanos and people from Latin America. So what we see here is what Elaine is bringing out is rhetoric associated with hateful ideas and opinions, and also ideas about people of color, and it's basically racism. So what she's pointing out is how people can say very racist and horrible things with impunity. People that are supposed to be our elected officials, people who we're supposed to entrust with power. And of course, it's very disturbing that this happens, and if we think that it's just all fluff, it's really not. It sets a tone about how we see ourselves and others. It sets a tone of how we treat each other, and it also sets a tone for how we interact. And I think that we've seen this explode onto college campuses recently in Missouri. We've seen it explode in Harvard. We've seen it also reiterate itself in the justice system and issues that we have with policing. And so when we think about racist comments, and it's not just about what people say, it is very not only hurtful, but it has an impact on society.
Thank
you. Could I follow up what she just said? Could I follow up? I feel like a Republican candidate now. Can I have a follow-up? But I do agree. I think it's a very important point. And I think if what we've seen over the past year through the Black Lives Matter movement, I think what we've seen through our television sets in terms of what's happening across the sea in Iraq and Afghanistan, when we generally describe a group of people as a threat to our safety, be they black men, be they Iraqi civilians, be they women and children, what we actually do is we provide ourselves the ability to perpetrate violence against individual members of that group. That's the great irony. And it's only thanks to cameras. If it wasn't for cameras, those men in Abu Ghraib would have been angry combatants. If it wasn't for cameras, those black men being shot would have been criminals. And what is the one banned object in a U.S. immigration detention center? A camera.
Thank you.
And just to conclude, that's very true. And I think that what he's speaking to is the criminalization of migration and of migrants, and its intensification after 9/11, and how policy measures are always not only help us move forward in some cases, also take steps back, in that it further criminalizes migration by creating new borders, creating more militarized spaces on the Rio Grande border. My uncle's house, he lives right on the border with Camargo in the valley, and there's a blimp in front of his yard, taking surveillance pictures 24 hours a day. My uncle is not a criminal, yet that entire community is treated as if they are enemies of the state. And so these are they have a real impact on the way that we live our lives, right? To be thought of as criminals when, of course, we're just going about our everyday lives in the valley, right? Trying to make a way for ourselves in the borderlands.
Thank you, Aimee. So I know that each of you is doing incredibly important work in the area of immigration, each in your own area, in your own way. And one of the things that the students want to know, again, it's the students' questions, is what can we do in our local communities to be more informed and more engaged in terms of working in this area. So people are wanting to know what they can do. This community here is wanting to know what we can do more of, right, to move this issue forward.
There are so many groups doing good work, whether it is simply showing up at a march, going to a talk and informing themselves so that they're better members of a democratic society. In San Antonio, we have so many groups like Catholic Charities that is actually doing simple things like welcoming people. There's the Interfaith Welcome Coalition that they put together backpacks so that every person who is let go of a detention center has a backpack full of hygiene items and snacks that they can take on a bus because they're headed across the country. There are people working for Fuerza Unida who you can count them out at any march and they'll come out and support fair policy. There's people at Esperanza Center who do small tasks to big policy issues. So, and here's the other thing, I cover faith now, and so many congregations do little things and large things all on their own. Whether it's finding out who are the immigrants among us and welcoming the stranger, and making sure that they know about a new program or that they're welcome to join the chorus too. So there are so many ways you can get involved, from going online and donating the costs of filling a backpack for the Interfaith Welcome Coalition to getting out there on your own.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, you're very lucky. You live in San Antonio, Texas, the epicenter of immigration activity, really in the nation. It's something I've learned over the course of a decade. You go to Washington, D.C., you go to New York to attend these big conferences, and you realize that what they're talking about, we are living here. We are confronting on a day in and day out basis, and in such greater magnitude. This is the mecca of immigration detention in the United States. There are more detained immigrants in South Texas than in the rest of the nation combined. This is where it's at. You don't have to go to New York, you don't have to go to LA or to Washington, D.C. to get into the center of the immigration debate. This is the center of the immigration debate. And if there is a solution to these problems, it is not going to come from Washington. It is going to come from San Antonio, Texas.
I would just say that I agree that there's incredible work going on in San Antonio, but I do think it's important for you to leave San Antonio, just temporarily share that. Whether it's to share your concern about family detention or detention generally, whether it's to share the work that you're doing to help welcoming the stranger, whether it's to share your cool and exciting and interesting project for helping people become citizens. That is something that, you know, as someone who leaves San Antonio often to do work outside of San Antonio, I think it's important for us to share our story, because not everyone knows about the wonderful work going on down here, and so it's certainly important to do work with Catholic Charities, with your local church, with your school, with your PTA, etc. Volunteering in family detention facilities, helping people get access to the immigration courts. I think all of that is very important, but I would also just urge you to share your story, because one way or the other we're going to have to change our immigration laws, and that does have to happen in Washington, unfortunately. And there are ways we can make the laws better at the state level, but there's a lot of federal laws that need changing, and so I think that it's important to share that perspective of what you think is broken, so that we can fix it. It will take time, but it is still very important to share those stories.
Thank you, Alicia and Jonathan. Anna?
Yes, of course. The way that students can get involved in the issue is taking ethnic studies, taking Mexican American studies.
Yes.
And I'm not just saying that because I teach these classes. Because often what we get in the media is pretty good reporting sometimes, and you can get, and sometimes not, you can get all kinds of terrible information on the internet, you can get some good information, but how are you going to know how to evaluate it if you don't know the basics of the issue? And you have to start with the history. You have to start with, the very fundamental aspects of immigration law, the foundation of our nation, and all of it in order to really inform yourself on what is happening today. And so I encourage you to take ethnic studies. And one of the solutions that was brought forth by students protesting in Missouri was a requirement that everybody take ethnic studies, which I thought was interesting.
Yes.
So the other part is that we haven't touched on so much, but Felicia says that you must share your story. But this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This happens, people who shared their stories were part of a movement, yes? We also know that our elected officials have to be pushed to do the right thing. That happens through movements. The Dreamers were a movement. They weren't individuals just went out there and told their stories. Their stories were really important, but there was a strategy behind that, right? And they did some very hard work in order to get this legislation passed, right? These laws passed. And it's still not as far as they wanted it to go, right? It is a temporary solution, and we're very thankful for it, of course. But it is a temporary solution. What I really encourage students to do is get involved in the movement, because there's so much going on with grassroots policy making. Because things aren't working at the federal level, we need to work on jailing policies. We need to work on anti-racial profiling policies. We need to work on sanctuary city resolutions. We need to work on policing. And these things all happen at the local level. They happen with you and me getting together, talking to our city councilmen, talking to our representatives, and actually getting laws passed at the municipal level and state level that are going to benefit immigrants and that are going to benefit all of us.
Thank you, Ben. So we'll move on
very
to the
quickly,
next.
just very quickly, I would say I actually also brought sign-up sheets right here for those who want to volunteer, because we need weekend staff at the shelter this weekend. And also, a great way to get up to date is through our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, both under the same name, which is the word RAICES, R-A-I-C-E-S, Texas, all spelled out, all one word, RAICES, Texas. You'll find us on Facebook, and we have about 20 videos right now up on YouTube that we have produced ourselves of the very testimonies of the women and children who are getting out of these detention centers just in the hours and days following their release. And I think that is where you really get to the heart of the matter. Those who have been to these facilities know it, and I would invite you as well, after you've taken the tour. I've been on the tour. It's a very nice tour. Come to our shelter, speak to the women, and hear the truth.
Thank you, Jonathan. So we'll move on to our final question for the evening, and this is a predictive one. So the students are wanting to know what you all see as the future, or what's going to happen in the future for immigration policy. And so they're wanting to sort of get a sense of what they can have hopes for. So whoever would like to speak.
At the end of this century, we'll be the largest Spanish-speaking nation on earth. What do you think is going to happen? It's a matter of time. But I would quote Dick Cheney, we're experiencing the last throes of European insurgency in the United States.
You know what, I am reminded that many years ago, Doris Messner, I believe is her name, she was Commissioner of Immigration, and she's now she's an academic and just fabulous. And I was interviewing her, and she says, well, you know, there's good reason why we're debating immigration so much. You know, at the beginning of our history as a nation, we preferred immigrants of European heritage. So we, you know how people say, oh, my family came over and we were legal. We did it all the legal way. Well, I mean, if you really want to come here legally, and you are the adult child of a U.S. citizen and who's from Mexico, and you want to come here legally to join your family, your wait to get a visa is 7 to 20 years. Now, a whole life will happen in that time. So it's no wonder that, and then we present all these jobs to them that Americans will not do. I know that's controversial to say, but Americans will not do certain jobs. They just won't do them. which is why you have the Texas Farm Council in support of immigration reform, because they know they have to get people to work in the fields. So I don't predict the future. I don't know, but I do know that immigrants will continue to come because work is available for them, and we want them to do these jobs because who's going to take care of our children? Who are going to be our nannies? Who are going to be our workers? Who are going to bring new jobs? Because immigrants create businesses all the time. They have an entrepreneurial spirit that's very American. So I suspect that we'll continue to have waves of immigrants, but how we treat them is, I hope, what we will change.
Thank you, Elaine. So I'm going to ask Aimee to respond, and then we're going to give the last word to Felicia, our guest of the evening.
Yes, oftentimes when we hear about immigration, we hear all of the negative and not what immigrants bring to society, right? And also the boon that they bring as far as economics are concerned. But we also have to understand that immigration policy began, right, with the Chinese Exclusion Act.
What was that about?
Again, with excluding Chinese from coming to the United States because of the gold rush, that they did not want them to mine, and that they did not want them to be here for that reason. So there's always been a labor and economic reason, but also it was also a racist policy. So we understand that the roots of immigration policy have always had this tinge of racism, right? And also the tinge of treating certain populations as disposable labor. So Mexicanos in particular have been treated as disposable labor throughout the history of immigration. In the 1930s, there was mass deportations, right? People got rounded up because what was happening in the United States was the Great Depression, and deported. A lot of them came back, others made different plans, right, for themselves in Mexico. But we know that then there was the Bracero program, and people were welcomed here, right, during World War II to come work in the fields. Then, again, mass deportation. So what are we experiencing now is mass deportation again. Okay, and we have to think about the reasons why. And the mass deportation is something that we don't see people being rounded up, put on trains, and shipped back. It's happening at the local level, within jails, within the interior of the nation, between collaborations between ICE and local police forces. When people get a traffic ticket, they're taken in, and all of a sudden ICE is on the phone with you, and you're in deportation proceedings. So this is an unprecedented kind of historical phenomenon in that we're not only doing immigration enforcement at the border, we're doing immigration enforcement everywhere, so that the border is everywhere.
Thank you, Aimee. Felicia?
Thank you so much for having me. And I would also make a plug for ethnic studies, because I would say that I mentioned the Ethnicity, Race, and Migration program at Yale. Like, that's really where I brought all these issues came together for me, and where I first learned about the Chinese Exclusion Act and things like that. You know, and you're right to say that our immigration system, we always talk about our nation of immigrants, and that's the positive, right? But everyone always forgets the generation before that was the other, right? So it wasn't just the Chinese; it was all Asians. It was the Italians. It was the Irish. It's now Latinos, right? Who are the other, right? That they don't want to come, and it's always been a struggle in our country. And I think that we need to make things better, and so I think by people sharing their concerns about the way the current system is working, that is one way to make things better. I think, as you mentioned, you're right to say that it's not just about sharing your voice, but it's also about being part of a larger movement and being strategic about how you share your voice, because that also matters, and that helps move the ball forward. You need to know what you're going at. In terms of the system, I mean, I think that we're going to struggle with these issues of the Central American migration issues. There is more that we can do to make the system work better for the humanitarian process. There is more we can do, not just for Syrians, but for Central Americans, to open up the doors to the refugee system for them. And that's something that was already work that was happening, but is even in clearer focus right now for the world, not just for our country, because of what's happening with the Syrian migration crisis. I think that we will eventually fix the system. It will continue to take time, and it's probably going to take another election for folks in another party to realize that we need to fix the broken system in a massive way. There are so many things wrong with the system. People have pointed out just a few of those things right now, and so we need to continue to work towards legislation. But until we get there, I know that we will, at the White House and in this administration, be working to address the concerns that people are raising here today, and to try to make the system work better. We will probably not always agree, but no one's ever always agreed on this issue, which makes it a fun and exciting and unpredictable issue to work on, and also makes it very important work for everyone that comes to the table, because they have a unique perspective to bring. So I think we will get there eventually on immigration reform. I think that there will continue to be concerns about detention and border security. Unfortunately, I feel that when we get to an immigration reform legislation, there will likely be more, unfortunately, because unfortunately that is the way that some people think that we're going to secure the border and make our system work better. And so what we need to do as policy makers is try to find compromise, but we have to make the right compromise, right? We can't just make compromise and pass a law for passing a law's sake. We want to make sure that it is balanced, and that's what we've worked on as an administration, trying to get all the right pieces balanced. We don't always get it right, but we'll continue to do that work. So thank you.
Thank you so much.